Maple Ridge Estates was exactly what I had been looking for when I purchased my home 3 years ago. The neighborhood sat nestled among tall oak trees, with curved streets and well-maintained properties creating a picture-perfect suburban setting. My house was modest compared to some of the larger homes, but I had worked hard to maintain it. The lawn was always cut to regulation height, the exterior paint refreshed each spring, and my garden beds kept free of weeds. I was proud of my little corner of the world. My career in cybersecurity had taken an interesting turn 2 years ago when I began contracting with federal agencies. The work was fascinating, monitoring potential threats to national infrastructure through seemingly ordinary channels. It paid well and gave me a sense of purpose beyond the typical corporate security world I had inhabited before. The job came with unusual requirements, however, including the need to install specialized surveillance equipment at my home. The federal agents explained that my location was strategically valuable. "Your house is positioned at the perfect junction point for our monitoring network," Agent Mitchell had said during the installation. "This equipment will help us track potential threats moving through this region." The mailbox became the logical housing for some of this equipment, an innocent-looking vessel that would raise no suspicions while containing sophisticated monitoring technology. I obtained all the necessary permissions and paperwork. The Postal Service had approved the modifications, and I had documentation from the Department of Homeland Security authorizing the installation. The mailbox looked ordinary from the outside, a standard black metal box on a wooden post, but inside contained sensitive equipment that transmitted data to federal agencies tracking potential threats. The problems began shortly after Karen Whitfield was elected president of our homeowners association. She moved into the largest house on the street 6 months ago and immediately campaigned for leadership, promising to restore property values and enforce standards. What this actually meant was a reign of petty tyranny that had most homeowners walking on eggshells. I first encountered Karen at the community pool last summer. She approached me with clipboard in hand and that artificial smile that never quite reached her eyes. "You must be Daniel from Oakwood Drive," she said, her voice syrupy sweet but with an edge like a knife wrapped in cotton candy. "I wanted to personally welcome you to our little community and make sure you received the updated HOA handbook." "I have lived here for over 2 years," I told her, trying to keep my tone neutral, "and I have the handbook, thank you." Her smile tightened. "Well, there have been some changes to our standards. I would hate for anyone to fall out of compliance." The next day, I received my first citation for a bird feeder visible from the street. The citation specifically referenced Section 8, Paragraph 3 of the newly revised HOA guidelines. No external feeding stations or wildlife attractants may be visible from common areas. Over the following months, the citations continued for increasingly trivial matters. The color of my garden hose was not in keeping with neighborhood aesthetic standards. My recycling bin had been left at the curb 30 minutes past the permitted time. Each citation came with Karen's signature and a personal note reminding me that standards matter. I was returning from collecting my mail one Tuesday afternoon when I noticed Karen making her rounds through the neighborhood. She wore pressed khaki pants and a crisp white blouse, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She moved from house to house with her ever-present clipboard, making notes and occasionally taking photographs with her phone. When she reached my property, she paused longer than usual. Her eyes narrowed as she studied my mailbox, her head tilting slightly as if something about it bothered her. She made several notes, photographed it from multiple angles, then looked toward my house. I stepped back from the window, but not before seeing her expression harden into something that sent a chill down my spine. She circled my mailbox one more time, then made a final note on her clipboard before continuing down the street. Something told me this was just the beginning of trouble. The first official HOA complaint arrived 3 days later in a crisp white envelope with the Maple Ridge Estates logo embossed in gold. Inside was a formal notice citing my mailbox for nonconformity with Section 12.4 of the HOA Aesthetic Guidelines. According to the notice, all mailboxes in the community were required to be the approved model, a colonial style in either forest green or burgundy with brass numbering. My standard black mailbox apparently violated the visual harmony of the neighborhood. I placed the notice on my kitchen counter N. X to the growing stack of similar citations. In the past month alone, I had received notices about my grass being 2 inches too tall, my trash cans being visible from the street for 30 minutes beyond the permitted time window, and the allegedly inappropriate placement of my garden gnome. Each violation came with a fine, small at first, but increasing with each repeat offense. The following morning, I found Karen standing near my property line, measuring the height of my hedges with a tape measure. She wore oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat as if on safari in suburban America. Her Mercedes SUV idled at the curb, its glossy black surface reflecting the morning sun. "Good morning, Karen," I said, stepping onto my driveway. "Is there something I can help you with?" She startled slightly, then regained her composure. "Just conducting routine compliance checks," she replied, her voice clipped. "Your hedges are 3 inches above regulation height." "I trimmed them last week," I said. "Well, they have grown since then." She made a note on her clipboard. "And I notice you have not addressed the mailbox violation. The grace period ends in 4 days." I took a deep breath. "About that, I cannot change my mailbox. It has been approved by federal authorities as part of my work contract." Karen lowered her sunglasses to look at me directly. "I do not care if the president himself approved it. In Maple Ridge Estates, we have standards. Federal requirements do not override HOA bylaws that you agreed to when purchasing your home." Rain began to fall, large drops pattering around us. Neither of us moved. "The mailbox stays," I said firmly. "I have documentation from both the Postal Service and Department of Homeland Security authorizing its current configuration." Karen's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Do you think you are the first homeowner to claim special circumstances? Everyone believes their situation is unique, but rules exist for a reason." Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against her clipboard. "If the mailbox is not replaced by Friday, the fines will begin at $200 per day." "That is excessive and unreasonable," I protested. "The bylaws allow for escalating penalties to ensure compliance." Her smile was cold. "Perhaps next time you will think twice before ignoring notices." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and your garden gnome is still visible from the street. That will be another $75 fine." That night, I sat at my computer reviewing security footage from the past week. Karen had been photographing my property more frequently, often when she thought no one was watching. Her interest in my mailbox seemed obsessive, with multiple close-up photos taken from different angles. Something about her behavior felt increasingly concerning. I pulled up the building plans for my property and began mapping out optimal camera placements. By midnight, I had ordered additional security equipment, weatherproof cameras with night vision capabilities and motion detection features. If Karen was planning something, I wanted to be prepared. The screens bathed my face in blue light as I positioned virtual cameras for maximum coverage. One aimed directly at the mailbox, another capturing the front approach, and 2 more covering the periphery. The system would send alerts to my phone if any unusual activity was detected. As I finally went to bed, thunder rumbled in the distance. The brewing storm outside matched the growing tension I felt. Karen was not someone who accepted defeat gracefully. She would escalate, and when she did, I would be watching. The following Friday morning brought clear skies and an unexpected call from my federal supervisor. "We need you in Washington for an emergency consultation," he explained. "The situation with the infrastructure monitoring has developed some complications. Can you be here by this evening?" Within hours, I had packed a small suitcase and programmed my home security system for extended monitoring. I performed a final check of the mailbox equipment, confirming all systems were operational and transmitting data correctly. Before leaving, I positioned my car in the garage rather than the driveway, a small precaution to make it less obvious I would be away for the weekend. The security cameras silently recorded as I pulled out of the neighborhood. My phone would receive alerts for any motion detected near my property, and the footage would be stored both locally and in cloud storage. I had done everything possible to protect my home during my absence. The first day passed without incident. Security alerts showed the mail carrier delivering letters, a neighbor walking their dog past my house, and the automatic sprinklers activating in the early morning. Nothing unusual appeared in the footage. Saturday brought more of the same routine neighborhood activities. That evening, I attended a dinner with colleagues from the HOA discussing potential improvements to the monitoring network. My phone remained quiet in my pocket, no security alerts triggering my attention. The peace shattered at 11:42 p.m. on Saturday night. My phone vibrated with multiple alerts in rapid succession. I excused myself from the hotel bar and found a quiet corner to review the footage. What I saw made my blood run cold. A black Mercedes SUV had pulled up in front of my house, headlights extinguished as it coasted to a stop. The driver's door opened, and Karen emerged, dressed entirely in black. She moved with purpose, looking carefully in both directions before opening her trunk and removing what appeared to be a baseball bat. The night vision camera captured her approach to my mailbox with startling clarity. Her face showed a mixture of determination and righteous indignation as she circled the mailbox once, as if considering her approach. Then, without hesitation, she raised the bat and swung. The first blow dented the metal side. The second struck with greater force, partially dislodging the mailbox from its post. Karen paused, adjusted her grip on the bat, and continued her assault with methodical precision. Each swing seemed calculated, targeted to cause maximum damage. Metal cracked under the repeated impacts. The mailbox door hung precariously from one hinge, revealing the equipment inside. Undeterred, Karen directed her attention to the exposed technology. The bat connected with delicate circuitry, sending sparks flying in the darkness. She continued until the mailbox was completely destroyed, its contents scattered across my front lawn. When finished, Karen stood back to survey her work. Her chest heaved with exertion, but her face showed satisfaction. She returned the bat to her trunk and drove away slowly, headlights still off until she reached the end of the street. I stared at my phone in disbelief, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and shock. This was not just property damage, it was the deliberate destruction of federal surveillance equipment. I immediately called my supervisor. "Sir, there has been an incident at my residence," I explained, my voice tight with controlled fury. "The equipment has been compromised, deliberately destroyed by my HOA president." There was a long pause. "Do you have evidence of the destruction?" "Yes, sir, multiple camera angles, all capturing the incident clearly." "Do not touch anything when you return. We will have agents meet you there in the morning. This is now a federal investigation." I checked out of the hotel immediately and began the long drive home. Highway lights streaked past as I pushed the speed limit, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. What had begun as petty HOA harassment had escalated into something with potentially serious legal consequences. As I drove through the night, my phone continued to receive alerts. Neighbors had noticed the destruction and were gathering near my property. One had even called local police, who arrived to take preliminary reports. The officer's flashlight beam swept across the scattered debris, illuminating the sophisticated equipment that now lay exposed and damaged. Dawn was breaking as I turned onto my street. From a distance, I could see yellow police tape cordoning off my front yard. An unmarked sedan was parked in my driveway. Federal agents had already arrived. What I had initially viewed as Karen's petty revenge had become something far more serious. She had not just destroyed my property, she had interfered with federal surveillance operations. And now, she would learn exactly what that meant. I pulled up behind the unmarked sedan and sat for a moment, taking in the scene before me. My front yard looked like a disaster zone. The mailbox post stood as a jagged wooden stump, surrounded by scattered metal fragments and circuit boards. Yellow police tape created a perimeter around the area, and a local officer stood guard, keeping curious neighbors at a distance. As I exited my car, a tall man in a dark suit approached. "Mr. Lawson, I am Special Agent Reeves with the Department of Homeland Security." He showed me his credentials. "Agent Cooper is documenting the scene. We need to speak with you immediately." I nodded, still processing the destruction before me. Up close, The damage was even worse than it had appeared on the security footage. The specialized equipment lay in pieces, delicate circuits exposed to the elements. Rain had fallen overnight, further compromising the sensitive technology. Inside my house, Agent Reeves sat at my kitchen table while I provided him with access to the security footage. Agent Cooper joined us shortly after, her expression grave as she reviewed her notes. The equipment was part of a broader surveillance network monitoring potential threats to critical infrastructure in this region, Agent Reeves explained to the local officer who had followed us inside. It's destructio. N creates a significant gap in our monitoring capabilities. I had no idea, the officer replied, looking somewhat out of his depth. We treated it as simple vandalism when the call came in. Agent Cooper turned to me. Mr. Lawson, we need to contact your supervisor immediately. This incident has compromised an ongoing federal operation. I called my supervisor and put him on speakerphone. The conversation was brief but consequential. The perpetrator needs to be charged to the full extent of the law, he instructed. The equipment was clearly marked with federal identification on the interior components. This was not just vandalism, it was an attack on government property. After the call ended, Agent Reeves explained the serious nature of the situation. Destruction of federal property is a felony offense carrying penalties of up to 10 years in prison and substantial fines. Additionally, there are charges related to interference with mail delivery, which is also a federal crime. And tampering with surveillance equipment used for national security purposes carries its own set of charges, Agent Cooper added. This is not a minor incident. I sat stunned, the coffee in my mug growing cold. What had begun as a petty neighborhood dispute had escalated into something that could potentially send Karen to federal prison. Despite my anger, I felt a creeping sense of unease at the severity of the consequences she now faced. We will need to question your HOA president immediately, Agent Reeves said, standing up. Do you know if she is home? Through my kitchen window, I could see Karen standing in her driveway across the street, watching the activity at my house with obvious concern. She was dressed in her usual impeccable style, but her posture was rigid with tension. Yes, I replied, she is right there. The agents thanked me for my cooperation and instructed me not to discuss the case details with anyone. We will keep you informed as the investigation progresses, Agent Cooper assured me. In the meantime, we will arrange for replacement equipment to be installed as soon as possible. As the agents crossed the street toward Karen's house, neighbors gathered on their lawns, watching the scene unfold with undisguised curiosity. Karen's expression changed from concern to alarm as the agents approached, badges visible. Even from a distance, I could see the color drain from her face as they spoke. Later that afternoon, Agent Reeves returned to provide an update. Mrs. Whitfield has been informed of the potential charges against her. She seemed genuinely shocked to learn about the federal nature of the equipment she destroyed. Did she confess? I asked. She admitted to destroying the mailbox but claimed she was simply enforcing HOA regulations. She insisted she had no knowledge of the equipment inside. Agent Reeves shook his head. Unfortunately for her, ignorance of what she was destroying does not mitigate the offense. That evening, I sat on my porch watching as forensic technicians finished collecting evidence from my yard. The neighborhood had never been so quiet. No children playing, no evening walkers, just the occasional car passing slowly as residents tried to catch a glimpse of the activity. My phone rang. It was my federal supervisor again. The damage assessment is complete, he said without preamble. The equipment will need to be completely replaced. More concerning is the data loss during the outage. We missed approximately 14 hours of monitoring, which creates a significant blind spot in our operations. I am sorry about that, I said. Not your fault, he replied, but this elevates the seriousness of the case. The U.S. attorney has been briefed and intends to pursue charges aggressively. As night fell, I watched lights come on in homes throughout the neighborhood. In Karen's house, shadows moved behind drawn curtains. What had started as her crusade to enforce HOA regulations had evolved into something neither of us could have anticipated. She had wanted to teach me a lesson about neighborhood standards. Instead, she was about to learn a harsh lesson about federal law. The next morning brought a flurry of activity to our normally quiet cul-de-sac. 2 additional unmarked federal vehicles arrived shortly after dawn. Agents in suits moved with purpose between their cars and my house, carrying equipment and speaking in hushed tones. My living room had been transformed into a makeshift command center. A female agent I had not met before introduced herself as Special Agent Diana Winters from the FBI. "We will be working jointly with Homeland Security on this case," she explained. "The implications extend beyond simple property damage." Agent Winters set up a laptop on my dining table and began reviewing the security footage frame by frame. "This is excellent documentation," she commented. "The night vision clarity is exceptional. We can clearly identify Mrs. Whitfield's face and actions." I provided the agents with documentation of my previous HOA disputes with Karen, the numerous citations, the escalating fines, the increasingly hostile tone of her communications. "There has been a pattern of targeting my property specifically," I explained, showing them the stack of violation notices. "And do you have the proper authorization for the mailbox installation?" Agent Winters asked. I retrieved a folder from my home office containing all the relevant documentation, the federal approval forms, the postal service permissions, the installation specifications. Everything was properly authorized and documented, I confirmed. Agent Winters nodded approvingly. "This makes our case considerably stronger. The equipment was legally installed with all proper clearances." From my living room window, I watched as another team of agents approached Karen's house. A man in a dark suit rang the doorbell while 2 others stood slightly behind him. Karen answered wearing a silk bathrobe, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Her expression shifted from annoyance to alarm as the agents showed their credentials. Through the window, I could see Karen gesturing animatedly as she spoke with the agents. She repeatedly pointed toward my house, her movements becoming increasingly agitated. Finally, she stepped aside to allow the agents to enter her home. Throughout the neighborhood, curtains twitched and blinds parted as residents observed the unusual activity. Some neighbors stood openly on their porches, watching and whispering to each other. The Maple Ridge Estate's community message board pinged repeatedly with questions and speculation. By midday, agents were conducting interviews with several neighbors who had witnessed the growing tension between Karen and me over the past months. Mrs. Chen from 2 doors down described how Karen had specifically called out my property at the last HOA meeting as a growing concern for community standards. The Johnsons recounted overhearing Karen telling another board member that she would take care of the mailbox situation personally if necessary. Shortly after lunch, I received a text message from Tom Barrett, the HOA vice president. "What is going on? Karen was just escorted to a federal vehicle for questioning." I did not respond. Agent Reeves had instructed me not to discuss case details with anyone in the community. From my window, I could see Karen being led to one of the unmarked cars. She had changed into a conservative navy blue dress, her posture rigid as she walked between 2 agents. Her husband stood in their doorway, his face a mask of confusion and concern. The local news had caught wind of the situation. A van with the Channel 8 logo parked at the entrance to our subdivision, but the federal agents prevented them from entering. "This is an active investigation," I heard one agent inform the reporter firmly. Late in the afternoon, Agent Winters returned from the field office where Karen had been questioned. "Mrs. Whitfield is being quite defensive," she informed me. "She maintains that she was acting within her rights as HOA president to remove non-compliant fixtures from the community." "Did you tell her about the federal equipment?" I asked. "We did." Her initial shock appeared genuine, but she quickly pivoted to blaming you for not informing the HOA about the specialized nature of the mailbox. Agent Winters shook her head. She seems to believe that her position as HOA president grants her some form of immunity or special authority. Agent Winters played a recording of part of Karen's interview. Her voice was high and strained, indignation evident in every word. He was violating clear bylaws. This is his fault for not following the rules. If he had special permission, he should have submitted proper documentation to the Architectural Review Committee. The agent questioning her remained calm. Mrs. Whitfield, did you at any point contact federal authorities to verify Mr. Lawson's claims about the mailbox before destroying it? A long pause followed, then Karen's voice, smaller now, no, but that was not my responsibility. He should have followed proper channels. As evening fell on the second day of the investigation, the agents packed up their equipment. We have what we need for now, Agent Reeves told me. The U.S. Attorney will be reviewing the evidence tomorrow morning. I expect formal charges will be filed shortly thereafter. 3 days later, I received a call from Agent Reeves. The U.S. Attorney has filed formal charges against Mrs. Whitfield, he informed me. She is being charged with destruction of federal property, obstruction of government operations, and mail tampering. She will be appearing for arraignment this afternoon. I watched the local news coverage as Karen was escorted into the federal courthouse. Gone were her designer clothes and confident bearing. She wore a simple gray skirt Hewitt and walked with her head down, trying to shield her face from the cameras. Her husband walked beside her, his arm protectively around her shoulders. The charges were read aloud in the courtroom. Destruction of federal property, a felony carrying up to 10 years imprisonment and fines up to $250,000. Obstruction of government operations, carrying up to 5 years imprisonment. Mail tampering, a federal offense carrying up to 5 years imprisonment. Karen pleaded not guilty to all charges. The judge set bail at $50,000, which her husband immediately arranged to pay. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions as Karen hurried to a waiting car, her attorney making brief statements about overreaching federal prosecution and a simple neighborhood dispute being blown out of proportion. That evening, I received a formal notice of an emergency HOA meeting scheduled for the following week. The subject line read, "Urgent meeting regarding recent community incidents and temporary leadership transition." Mixed emotions swirled through me as I watched the situation unfold. On one hand, Karen had deliberately destroyed my property after weeks of targeted harassment. On the other hand, the severity of the charges against her seemed disproportionate to what had begun as a petty neighborhood dispute. Federal prison time for smashing a mailbox, even one containing government equipment, felt excessive. My phone rang repeatedly with calls from neighbors seeking information. I followed the agent's instructions and kept my responses vague. "It is an ongoing federal investigation," I told them. "I cannot discuss the details." The community center was packed beyond capacity for the emergency HOA meeting. Every seat was filled, with additional residents standing along the walls. Tom Barrett, the vice president, called the meeting to order with visible discomfort. "As many of you know, our board president, Karen Whitfield, is currently facing certain legal challenges," he began carefully. "The board has voted to temporarily suspend her from her duties pending resolution of these matters." The room erupted in questions and comments. Some residents defended Karen's dedication to maintaining property values and community standards. Others expressed shock at her actions, regardless of her motivations. "She was just trying to enforce the rules we all agreed to when we moved here," argued Mrs. Peterson from Willow Lane. "But taking a baseball bat to someone's property is not enforcement, it is vandalism," countered Mr. Jackson from across the room. Karen's husband stood up, his voice trembling slightly. "My wife made a mistake in how she handled the situation, but the punishment she is facing is vastly disproportionate. This could ruin our lives. She could go to prison for years, lose her real estate license, all because of a mailbox." I sat quietly in the back, observing the community fracturing before my eyes. The HOA board looked uncomfortable as residents took sides, pointing fingers and making accusations. What had once been a peaceful neighborhood was now divided. When asked to comment, I spoke briefly. I never wanted this situation to escalate to this point. This began as a dispute over HOA regulations, but has evolved into something far more serious because of the specific nature of the property that was destroyed. I cannot control how federal authorities choose to handle this case. As the meeting concluded, the weight of consequences hung heavy in the air. The board announced a special election to replace Karen and new guidelines for handling property disputes. Residents filed out in small groups, the usual friendly chatter replaced by hushed, tense conversations. Walking home alone, I reflected on the proportionality of justice. Karen's actions had been deliberate and malicious, but were the potential consequences, years in federal prison, career destruction, public humiliation, truly justified? The mailbox could be replaced, the equipment restored, but the impact on human lives would be lasting. 6 months passed before the case reached its resolution. Karen accepted a plea deal offered by the U.S. Attorney's Office. She would plead guilty to destruction of federal property with a reduced sentence of 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and a $10,000 fine. She would also be required to pay for the replacement of all damaged equipment. The neighborhood gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. A new HOA board was elected, with a focus on more collaborative community governance. The draconian enforcement of regulations was replaced by a more reasonable approach that emphasized communication over punishment. My new mailbox was installed with proper approvals from both federal authorities and the HOA Architectural Committee. It looked nearly identical to the original, but contained upgraded monitoring equipment with improved tamper resistance features. A small, discreet federal seal was now visible on the interior, a clear warning to anyone who might consider interfering with it in the future. The weather had turned warm again, with spring bringing new growth to the neighborhood. I was tending to my garden when I noticed Karen approaching slowly down the sidewalk. This was the first time I had seen her in months. She looked different, her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a button-down shirt, her previously highlighted hair now a natural brown. She stopped at the edge of my property, hesitant. "May I speak with you for a moment?" she asked, her voice lacking the imperious tone I remembered. I nodded, setting aside my gardening tools. "I wanted to apologize," she said simply. "What I did was wrong, regardless of HOA rules or personal feelings." I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I never thought about the consequences," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "I was so focused on rules that I forgot about people, about basic respect for others' property and privacy." "It was never about the mailbox itself," I replied after a moment. "It was about the approach, the targeting, the escalation, the refusal to communicate reasonably." Karen nodded. "I have had a lot of time to think about that. The community service I am doing, helping renovate homes for veterans, has been eye-opening. Rules matter, but so does compassion." No Hollywood reconciliation occurred between us. Some bridges remained too damaged to rebuild, but there was acknowledgement, a nod to lessons painfully learned. We would never be friends, but perhaps we could coexist peacefully as neighbors. As Karen walked away, I noticed other neighbors in their yards, watching our interaction with curiosity. Some nodded to me with newfound respect. Others simply returned to their activities, the drama that had consumed our community finally subsiding. That evening, I sat on my porch as sunset bathed the cul-de-sac in golden light. Children played in the street again, riding bikes and drawing with sidewalk chalk. Neighbors walked dogs and chatted across driveways. The tension that had gripped Maple Ridge estates for months had finally dissipated. My gaze drifted to the new mailbox standing at the edge of my property, a simple object that had become the catalyst for significant change. What began as a clash over neighborhood aesthetics had transformed our community, revealing the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of proportional justice. Sometimes the most important changes come from unexpected places. Sometimes justice arrives in the most ordinary packages, and sometimes the most valuable lesson is learning where to draw the line between enforcing rules and respecting humanity.